Look at us go.
Let us go. Welcome back. We're the Book Mavens. I'm Amanda. She's Rachel, and you're joining us for our Temeraire summer project. And this week we are reading book 7, which is Crucible of Gold. Okay, so where we left off in the last book, Temeraire and Lawrence have essentially retired to their beautiful valley. They're raising cattle and building a pavilion and very happy. And this book opens with the return of Hammond, the pretentious diplomat that went with them to China in an earlier book. He's back. He comes to Australia to find them. And that's where the book picks up. So essentially, Lawrence gets reinstated. They want him to go serve almost as an ambassador. So he's reinstated to captain in the Aerial Corps. He gets orders. They want him to serve almost as an ambassador, a liaison, because the African dragons and people with them sailed to Brazil. And in an earlier book, they talked about that essentially they are decimating like Rio, and because they are going after their descendants. They're going after their family. Who, with, the triangle trade, that's where a lot of them had been sent, was to Brazil, which is under Portuguese control. Portuguese is aligned with Britain. So they sent him there because of his experience with those dragons, which was being held captive for several months. And Lawrence is like,
it's your only connection.
But they're like, literally, you're the only one who has had any exposure to them or the language. You're the man for the job. So him and Temeraire and his Skirka, because she's not going to be left behind, they sail.
They do get to leave Caesar behind.
They do get to leave Caesar behind. Yay.
No more Rankin.
Yay.
Woohoo.
So then they're off on their adventure.
And our new dragon.
Klingle. I heard it in the audiobook, and it's just not sticking. Anyway, so then this is their journey trying to get to Brazil, which gets detoured multiple times, which we'll talk about in a second. So this is their journey to Brazil. So we're going to yet another new place. Yay! Because
I always enjoy how
Outback
she writes
Lawrence
the
was
time.
rough.
Yeah, Outback Lawrence was rough. I always like how she writes the time that they spend on ships, because we do see these massive dragon transports. It takes them months to get anywhere, and so it's very interesting to see what happens on these ships. So Riley is back with the Allegiance. I love it. It's always the same ship.
Well, there's not that many dragon transports, which is interesting. And I mean, that brought them to Australia. Now they're going back, and
no Tarkay on this one though. He stays.
Tarkay has left. He's going back to Istanbul to report, basically, because remember he's been working for the East India Trading Company. So Hammond is going with Lawrence, which Lawrence is not thrilled about. He does not really care for Hammond.
They have this weird love-hate relationship. I mean, not that he ever loves Hammond, but he had respect for him regarding what happened in China eventually. But he annoys the crap
out of Hammond. But Hammond will just sacrifice people right, left, and center. I mean, you remember, like, he was like, no, we're going to totally give him Temeraire. And Lawrence is like, we absolutely are not going to do that. And, like, he's like, well, why not? Like, you can just stay here forever. And, like, he's such an opportunist, too, with it. And he has this, like, intense personal rivalry with the French ambassador, Deguine.
Yeah.
It's so funny, because every time Deguine comes up, he's like, oh, he's just so he's this personal and Deguine is always like so polite to his face and so French. She's like, oh, I'm so glad you're here, and the hospitality, and Hammond's over there like fuming. So it's nice to see that rivalry is alive and well, because apparently Deguine is also going to the same place. So
not to Rio. They're
not
going
to Rio.
To the Incans.
So tragedy strikes early on. So in the first part of the book, it's so sad. It's so sad. Like,
they encounter a horrific storm.
5 days, 5 nights.
And so the dragons are chained to the deck. Skirka has a cow. She's being sandwiched between Temeraire and
Klingle. Okay, I do love it one scene too where she's like, I'm not having this anymore, and she starts to move around, and Domain just whispers to me, and he's asleep. He just goes,
yeah.
And like lays his arm over, and then she can't move because he's so big. And she's like,
but you could just feel that. I would feel it. They'd be like suffocating.
Like claustrophobic.
Yeah. And so.
And so when the storm finally resolves itself, everyone's exhausted, particularly the captains. And
Lawrence steps up because Lawrence is no longer so worried, especially in emergency situations, about protocol. He knows how to captain a ship. Riley is exhausted. He has nobody else to help, and he finally told Riley, "Go. I got it.
I will be the first lieutenant for your first lieutenant, and then he can come trade off with you, and I'll help you."
You cannot keep going.
Lawrence has essentially decided that he will accept this assignment, but he's going to make decisions based on his own terms. Like there's a great line in there where he talks about he won't be the government's butcher again. So, and he tells him in that, he goes, "I'll accept it and I'll do it, but I'm not going to do things that I won't. Like, I'm not going to do anything that I think is immoral or, so it's a huge shift for Lawrence from this kind of obedience, blind obedience thing." So, but essentially after the storm, the crew, which they'd have to resupplement a lot of their crew in Australia, which means a lot of them were convicts, they get into the alcohol and are basically, they start a fire.
Lawrence at this point is exhausted. He's sleeping on Temeraire. He wakes up because he smells fire. Temeraire just thinks Gongsu's down there doing his thing. Doesn't realize, no, that's a different smell.
They're drunk and they're cooking cows inside. So they essentially set the ship on fire, and then it just escalates from there. And then you think, and I'm still even now I'm like, I'm still not totally sure that I understand what happened.
Hit some ammunition. Something happens where the ship breaks apart. Yeah,
it explodes and starts sinking, and
they're just frantically creating whatever they can to get people off the ship. So there's hundreds at that point of sailors underneath there in like his little belly sack.
In his netting, yeah. And then, so there's one group that's on boats, but the dragons, they're in the middle of the ocean. Yeah. So the dragons have to start flying. And they're flying with literally, because what Temeraire had done, he started gathering up the drunk sailors off of the ship into his belly netting to get them out of the way, and then the ship explodes. So he has the literal culprits. Yeah. The people who are responsible for this. And
the rest of the good sailors were all exhausted. They were sleeping below deck, so they're gone. They're gone. Yeah.
And it's hard to read. It's really hard. Lawrence is really trying to process a lot of frustration too, because they're just adding weight to Temeraire. And so they're sailing, they're flying, and they're trying to get away.
There's nothing.
And there's nothing. And then finally they spot a French transport ship, turns out, and the dragons land on it and basically pass out exhausted. And the last thing they hear is Lawrence say, "We surrender." And then that comes into play. Now, before we talk about where they're going on the French transport, it is worth noting that there's two kind of characters at play in this. Lawrence has hired a chaperone for Emily, which she is
not happy about.
He found a widow in Australia who had come to Australia with her husband, basically seeking adventures, what it sounded like to me. Yeah. And her husband passed away, so then she's kind of stranded there, and the only thing for her to do in Australia is to remarry, and so she signs on to be Emily's chaperone,
she was previously a governess.
So she's going to come and be important in the mix later. But so she's on Temeraire with them.
Is she though? Is she ever really that important at this point?
Well, she is in terms of getting them introduced into the court, because she's with the French, and then she's kind of an invitational convenience figure.
I feel like the Skirka does most of the work on that one, but
I don't know.
All right.
I don't like the Skirka in this book.
She's very annoying.
She really irritates me. But the other key factor of this wreck is that Riley is gone. Right, Riley is.
They think he's dead.
I think he is dead.
I think that there's still hope, because there were sailors on boats, and you have to think that perhaps they got some out of the water. We don't really know, because the dragons couldn't stay there. They immediately tried to go find land. So everyone assumes that all of those sailors are dead. But I mean, if they got picked up by a French transport, it's not impossible that they didn't encounter another boat.
I would love it if it's true. I don't think it is.
I don't know. I'm going to be on the side where I think that there's hope. She's saying no. So we'll see. I have not read ahead.
I would absolutely love to be wrong. Let me say that. But I don't think so. I don't think so. So Riley
popped up almost every book. I just feel like that's such a glorious end for him.
I know, but you know what? But also kind of exactly, because Lawrence even has this moment where he's talking about it, and he's trying to write to the Admiralty to explain, he had the worst of the worst crew, and after 5 days and 5 nights, he went to sleep for just a pure exhaustion, and they took over the ship, and because he knows that Riley, he's not going to be mourned properly because he'll only be remembered as the man who lost the allegiance. And he just thinks that is so unjust, which...
And it is.
It is unjust, but like, I don't know, I think he's gone. So anyway, we're on the French transport ship, and turns out the French are going to try to align with the Inca. So we don't go to Brazil right away. We get diverted, and then we get to learn about a whole other dragon culture with
feathers.
the Inca. They describe them as like really colorful, like feathered scales, like really interesting. And when they get there, the Inca...
Well, there's an Incan dragon that's on the ship. So the dragons are taking turns.
Malaire.
Yes,
Milia.
And he is like hot to trot for a scare cut.
He is warm to her form.
Yeah.
He's about it. And she's like, she soaks it up. And because she's still after Temeraire.
Yeah,
and
she's
Temeraire's
hoping
still
that
not
he'd
doing
get jealous. And Temeraire is just like, good riddance.
He's like, thank goodness. Let's go on with yourself.
Yeah.
So they get there. So they get marooned. The French captain maroons them on an island and like, well, we'll
just
come back for you
with
eventually.
Supplies.
Barely. They're like, give them like, they even said it's like
Well,
dull
things
hatchets.
happen.
Dull hatchets.
Well, they don't leave them any rope because they don't want them to be able to escape on the
no
dragons.
harnesses,
They want them to
nothing.
be stuck there.
Mm-hmm.
So now we've got Robinson Crusoe.
Crusoe Lawrence. Who I enjoy immensely, to be honest.
I do too. I mean, he's left with horrible people. There's hundreds of them. And he knows that they're going to be up to no good. There's Booze. And so Booze was what got him into the mess to begin with.
Yeah, remember, these are the guys from the belly knitting. The ones that were
grog.
so drunk they were actually in the way of trying to save the allegiance. So Temeraire had been picking them up and putting, like, this is the actual least useful of the least useful.
Amanda and I were talking about this earlier. Like, if you were ever in a survival situation, you'd want Lawrence to be there.
Oh,
like,
yeah, for sure.
He just straddles this world really well. And so, he immediately goes and they're finding ropes. So now they know they can make some kind of netting to keep them on the dragons. But what he's looking for and he finds were maps to be able to figure out where they were in relation to land. And so they literally, with the dragons, island hop until they reach where the Incans are.
Yeah, essentially the main continent, right? Central America.
It's interesting to talk about the Incan dragon relationship because the Incans themselves, like when we talk about European influence on native populations, that they're decimated by a plague. And so people are scarce and the dragons are literally like kidnapping people essentially and integrating them to be with them, and they're treated very, very well. Like there's some instance where they're talking about it's like, is this slavery? What's happening? But
the humans don't look at it that way. It's so intriguing. It's completely reversed of the British model because in the Incan model, the dragons are the stewards of the people. The dragon's job is to care for the people and their families. Yes. And the more people you have relied on you, the greater the status, right? So it's completely opposite. So when they actually arrive at
they're collectors.
Yeah, they collect people. When they get to the Incan court, they're recognized the French are already there, but they're recognized as influential, not because of the dragons they brought, but because they had about 200 people with them. So there's even a point where Hammond's like got them lined up in front of the dragon, so it looks like there's more of them than there are, like to be more impressive. But also,
there has been a few that have been lured away.
Yeah,
been captured.
Yeah, they keep like. It leads to a really interesting conversation because at one point some of the crew has basically deserted, but some of them, not all of them, but some of them are basically just going back to England to be executed for mutiny and for the loss of the ship. And so, but they keep giving them gifts. They keep giving them gifts in exchange for the people. And Lawrence is like, we cannot trade our men. And Hammond's like, but we really need this stuff. Why not? And he's like, no,
No, they're being treated. Eventually, Lawrence is just like, good riddance.
Do what you want.
At one point, like, yeah, I mean, because they're voluntarily leaving some of them. So it is what it is. It's a much better life for them there than it would be going back to be executed. Yeah. So, I mean, it's not really much of a choice.
It also turns out that the Incan Empire is matriarchal in its leadership at this point because the emperor died, and for a long time the empress was like ruling, like his go-between.
They compare it to Penelope, if you're familiar with like the Odyssey, and where she's holding off suitors and looking for the best advantageous match or whatever for
So then
That's pretty good.
So Ishkirka is the one that actually gets in there because she won this battle with another dragon, and she's a female.
You were so hoping that she's going to be knocked down a peg, and it just doesn't happen.
It doesn't happen right yet. I really wanted it a little bit. She doesn't. She wins, and then she's even more insufferable. So anyway, she actually becomes the speaker for the group, which sends everybody into just straight up panic because
Hammond is about ready to have his own egg.
Ishkirka is not who you want to speak for you.
She makes some very grandiose promises. She promises them more people, which she can't do.
She can't do.
But then she puffs up Granby and throws him in the pot in terms of a potential suitor. And Granby is like, no.
I don't want to do this at all.
And is being forced into it.
Because Ishkirka, as per typical Ishkirka, completely disregards what Granby wants. Because
she goes, I'm giving you a palace. Look at all of
I'm
this
going to make
gold.
you the emperor. You'll be the emperor of all of this.
It's
and
really
she
funny.
refuses to listen to him or acknowledge that this is not what he wants. And Hammond, of course, is all about it. He's like,
well, eventually
yes,
when he realizes that this
do it.
could be fortuitous,
Yeah.
he's not on board initially.
Yeah, let's go for it. We can then she'll be aligned with us. This will be great. And he's like, we'll just totally sacrifice you and leave
It's
you
all
here
about
forever.
taking it away from the French for Hammond, whatever he
And beating out the guys. Oh my gosh. So it's happening. And like Lawrence he has no advice for Granby. He's like, I don't know what to tell you here. It's worse. I will say this. Lawrence, it feels worse to Lawrence because it's a marriage and Lawrence was just being adopted, but at least he got to leave. But Granby would have to stay there.
It's not a piece of paper for them.
And it is so, and like Granby is so miserable, and Ishkirka just rolls right over him. But then Napoleon shows up, like in person, because at this point he's divorced Josephine, and he's like, "If you'll marry me," and like, and she very shrewdly, she's with all her shoes. Napoleon's like, "I sacrifice my physical comfort to come here and beg for your hand if you'll come rule with us," and blah blah blah. And the queen's or empress's dragon doesn't want it. Because the dragons are very protective of their people. The dragons want her to stay, like up in her mountain palace and not go nowhere because it's dangerous. So they don't really like Napoleon either. But
well, they're going to come in. The Incans are going to come in, take all of the people, basically the British, and no marriage is going to happen. She's going to marry Napoleon, and
they
flee.
Yeah, they end up fleeing, but not before.
What?
Temeraire gives in.
Oh,
That's where they were.
I forgot
when they discovered
about
that they're. She's so casual about it. Yeah, Temeraire finally gives in, and maybe there's an egg, maybe there's not with Ishkirka, but
we don't know. Story for another book, I guess.
Another book, because Leon's there.
Leon's not there.
Yeah, she comes with Napoleon.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And
She just doesn't. We never really speak to her, though.
So basically, what happens? Temeraire gets real down, and he says, "Well, why not?" So they go off. He's so proud of himself. He cooks llamas by himself for the first time.
He takes him back to show.
He wants to show Gongsu and be like, "Gongsu, look what I did." And that's when they see that they're about to be attacked, so they flee.
Yeah.
And they do eventually make it to Brazil. So a lot of the court and stuff, and so Granby's off the hook. But in the course of their escape, they fly to the Amazon River and then follow it to the shore.
His arm.
He loses an arm, and so they're with the Portuguese. This is where it really comes to a head with Ishkirka, which I was ready for. Temeraire and Kalingal had caught a whale, like a full gray whale, and brought it up, and then Ishkirka took it, got them to teach her how to render it down with her fire breath, and then had traded it for gold. So she essentially took this whale that they had caught. You
got to give her some credit, though.
I mean, I credit her for ingenuity, but
was like, why couldn't you share that we got the whale? Like, why weren't you telling me?
She kept the spoils for herself. Like, she didn't share it out with them. She gets Granby this gold hook with diamonds on it, and she's like, "Look at this hook I got you." And Granby looks at it, and he finally just says, "No, I have had absolutely enough." And she's like, "What do you mean? It's so beautiful, and I did it for you." And he goes, "No, you do for me what you want me to look like. You do not listen to me. You do things that make me look good in your eyes, not things that I want, and I am done with it. And if you want to cut me off and go get you another captain that'll put up with it, go ahead, but I have had enough and I'm done." And she's just like,
Like jaw drop.
Yeah, she's just, and even Temeraire like has this moment of like panic, like, have I done that to Lawrence? And Temeraire kind of does talk himself around like,
Well, but I give him options.
I only
just
encourage
make
him to wear it, and I don't make him do it because he's been really pushing this like nice set of robes that he got for him.
Nice.
But he doesn't force him, and he certainly doesn't like just do things without Lawrence. So Temeraire's fine. It's not the same. But as Scarecrow, it's a real humbling moment for her. And honestly, it's happened so close to the end. I'm not really sure how it's going to play out over time.
I don't know.
She seems to take it in. But we'll see. But Granby has reached his limit, and he's like, "You're going to just marry me off again to some prince, or whatever." But then he's very sweet to her. Like he's cut her deep by saying like, "I'm done. Leave me alone, or this becomes more of a partnership instead of a railroading." And then, but he says, she's like, "But I just wanted you to have these nice things and everybody to see how important you are," and blah blah blah. And he goes, the most important thing I have ever desired was to have you as my dragon.
That's it. You're my status symbol.
And that's enough for me. And like, so he softens it a little there at the end, but he's had enough. And I was clapping. I was like, yes, tell her, Granby. Good grief.
It was a lot.
It was so much. She was too much for me in this book. She's too much.
Well, we see the return of Mrs. Erasmus. That she's there because they're going there to once again find all their people, and they're trying to bring them back to Africa. And Lawrence immediately sees that there are thousands of them. There is no way that they're going to be able to load them on these ships comfortably with these dragons. There's a lot of the dragons there because they have made an arrangement with France that France is providing the transports. And this benefits France. It's benefiting them, or it's like kind of a mutual thing, but it's never going to play out the way that the French have promised. And so Lawrence is like, can we make a better deal? Let me get you some more transports. Like, can you work it out where, the people who want to stay. So Lawrence is the one, right, who says no, because Hammond's trying to get him to relinquish back to the Portuguese. Let's help them get the slave rebellion under control. And he says no. We already know that he's anti-slavery.
Yay, Lawrence.
And he says, we're not going to do this. These people need to be free. We can get them more transports. Let's go take these French frigates out. That's just his big plan. And have more boats available. We'll seize control of them. And then these people need to be free and be granted citizenship here. Period. End of story. So they won't lose their labor force. They can set up here dragons who do not have ancestral ties back in Africa, who had lost all their family where they're here, can set up here. Period. End of story. This is what's going to happen. I love Lawrence.
I love him. And they like fight him about it and whatever, but eventually they realize that because then Lily and Maximus come.
Oh, yes.
And they're like, yay, now we can really take on the African dragons. And they're like, no, we're with them. We're not doing that. And like, it's great. And Temeraire is so sweet, and he's back with Lily and Maximus, and like he's telling his friends about their adventure. It's just so sweet. And then he's like, well, what should we do next? And this is where, so Gongsu pops up with an invitation from Lawrence's brother, the Emperor's son, to come visit. And Lawrence is like, excuse me, what? Gongsu this whole time has been an employee of the Emperor's family. And Lawrence is like,
betrayal.
I thought you were for me.
Betrayal everywhere.
Because Hammond just is like, immediately sees Lawrence's face, is like, he's not a spy. He's not a spy. He's like, feels a little bit like a spy.
Because it always has been very interesting to me why Gongsu has decided to stick with them instead of going back to China. There was always like
the other cooks
thing, like,
quit.
Why? Why is it
that he's the one who's staying? So it was very interesting.
But so they decide that they're going to go to China because there's a possibility of an alliance or at least some kind of softening there.
They're not going to side with Napoleon.
Right. They may not be willing to help the British, but at the very least, they can smooth over the incident that happened in Australia. Mm-hmm. Like there's a possibility that they could tie themselves not with Napoleon.
Yep.
And that's where we leave off, is that we're going on yet another adventure on a sea transport that they have stolen from the French. And off we go. And that's where we leave it. And now I'm back in it. The last book, I was like, man, I was really slogging through this, and I'm back in.
This was a good one.
This was such a good one. Robinson Crusoe, Lawrence might be my favorite.
Well, he's so perfect in that role. He just knows exactly what needs to be done.
Oh, yeah. This is book 8. So there's only 2 more books left. So Blood of Tyrants and then book 9. And that's it. League of Dragons. And then we'll be at the end of the Temeraire series.
Look at this. I'm very excited. Because if you know anything about how these dragons are described, so we clearly had this is the last one, of course. Temeraire, Esquerca, and Leanne. They're up at the top.
So
So I am feeling this showdown.
I don't know what dragon this is supposed to be. Maybe it's
That's
supposed to be Temeraire.
That's Temeraire.
Temeraire on the next
This
one.
must be one of the Incan dragons, but it would have been cool for them to
Show the
it
feathers.
with feathers, because they are
That'd be
described
cool.
as having like feathered scales. Maybe that's what these are supposed to be.
Maybe on my edition they'll be more clear. So I'm getting the US edition, which is currently having a cover re-release. Listen,
But look at how cool they look.
they look so cool because they make a dragon. And they're gonna spell
I didn't know
his
they
name.
did that. Now I'm jealous.
I didn't know they did that when I bought them either. But only the first six. Yeah, only the first 6 of them have been released in this edition so far. So there's 3 more to go, and I'm like, get on it, Barnes and Nobles, or anybody, because who's doing it. But I need y'all to get on it because
And it spells Temeraire.
I'm ready to complete my set. Anyway, so join us next week where we'll be reading Book 8, Blood of Tyrants. We'll see you next time. Bye.